Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7. My name's Kenny McBride and I'm joined this evening by Linda Fabiani, the SNP MSP for East Kilbride, and by John Finney, the Green MSP for the Highland and Island region. And Linda, first, how are you this evening?
Oh, I'm fine. Yeah, just like everyone else.
Grand. And John, how are you?
I'm very well, thanks, Kenny. Yourself?
Excellent, thank you. Well, I'm not doing too badly. We go first to a wee update on coronavirus statistics. As of 2 p.m. today in Scotland, there have been a total of 25,022 tests concluded in Scotland. Of those, 20,793 were confirmed negative and 4,229 were positive. This marks an increase of 268 confirmed cases since yesterday. The number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the coronavirus infection has sadly risen to 296. The Scottish figures will be subject to adjustment when outstanding data becomes available. The latest UK figures available show that 6,159 patients who tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from the illness. A total of 213,181 people have been tested, of which 157,939 were negative and 55,242 were confirmed positive. In London, Boris Johnson was said to be stable in intensive care today after receiving oxygen support to help him battle COVID-19, while the Foreign Secretary, Dominic Raab, led the government's response to the outbreak. Johnson's personal battle with the virus has shaken the government just as the UK, now in its third week of virtual lockdown, enters what scientists say will be the most deadly phase of the pandemic, which has already killed more than 6,000 people in the country. Johnson, who is 55, was admitted to St Thomas's Hospital across the Thames from the House of Commons late on Sunday night after suffering persistent coronavirus symptoms, including a high temperature and a cough, for more than 10 days. His condition rapidly deteriorated over the next 24 hours and he was moved yesterday to an intensive care unit where the most serious cases are treated, in case he needed to be put on a ventilator. He was still conscious, his office has said. He is receiving standard oxygen treatment and breathing without any other assistance, Johnson's spokesman told reporters. The Prime Minister has been stable overnight and remains in good spirits, the spokesman continued. He has not required mechanical ventilation or non-invasive respiratory support. But the absence of Johnson, the first leader of a major power to be hospitalised after testing positive for the novel coronavirus, has raised questions about who is truly in charge of the UK now. Johnson has faced criticism for suggesting that the UK could take it on the chin, though he then imposed this lockdown after, as projections showed that theory could cause up to 500,000 deaths. And John, coming to you first, obviously we all wish Boris Johnson well. What's been your feeling about how this is all come out so far?
Well, specifically with regard to the UK Prime Minister, I think it is highly significant that a crisis like this, that the leader of the UK government finds themselves in that position. And as you say, everyone wishes Mr Johnson a full and speedy recovery. It's important to understand that government continues, and of course, government at UK level will only function effectively if it cooperates fully with the Scottish government. There are a lot of relationships that are important there. I have to be honest with you, there's a number of Conservative people who seem to have high positions that I've barely heard of, and I suspect I'm not unique in that. Some of the Conservative Party's grandees of the past, you could imagine stepping into shoes here. These are big asks. This is demanding time for people, and what it's important we understand the statistics, but the statistics are people. They're all individual. They're individual with friends and loved ones. We're worried about them. There's a community concern that has to be addressed as well. So testing times, but we hope certainly that Mr Johnson makes a full and speedy recovery.
And Linda, I mean, we're hearing that that Boris Johnson is normally very healthy, that he's never had a day's illness in his life. He's generally very fit. He has no underlying health conditions. And this really kind of shows up, doesn't it, how risky that idea of taking it on the chin and just letting the virus make its way through the population is, isn't it?
Well, when we first heard about coronavirus, and there was all the talk about it. We were told that 80% of us would probably end up with some form of it, but for most healthy younger people, it would be very mild symptoms, maybe a bit flu-like. But then every so often there's a case comes up. There was a wee laddie, there was the adolescent laddie, and there's healthy people we're hearing about all the time who are ending up losing their lives over this. So, this COVID-19 certainly is a killer. And it also shows that anyone at all can end up with it, which is why all the measures are so very, very important. We should certainly never be blasé or complacent. And that's why we've got to keep urging people to take all the safety measures they can about distancing, about lockdown as we call it, about hand hygiene. The one that I think is quite difficult is not touch your face, because I'd never been aware before just how often we all touch our face. Mm-hmm. I would imagine that women are worse than men for that, for always playing about with their hair and putting on makeup and things. And it is really, really difficult. But I think it's a big learning curve for all of us.
Yeah, well, that's the reason I shaved my beard off when the lockdown began, is because I found I was touching my face an awful lot. But on that question of who's running the government, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rishi Sunak, would take responsibility for leading the country if Dominic Raab, who is currently standing in for Boris Johnson, were also incapacitated. Foreign Secretary Raab has taken over some of the Prime Minister's responsibilities, including chairing the government's daily meeting on the coronavirus crisis, although Johnson remains Prime Minister. There is an established order of precedence, Johnson's spokesman said. In line with the order of precedence, the Chancellor would follow from the Foreign Secretary. Sunak was a surprise appointment in February when Johnson's planned reshuffle of the cabinet was blown off track by the resignation of Sajid Javid. Sunak, a 39-year-old former Goldman Sachs banker and staunch Johnson loyalist, has already risen rapidly through the ranks of government to one of the highest offices in the land, having only entered Parliament in 2015. He delivered his first budget in March, only weeks after taking office. He then had to pledge hundreds of billions of pounds of unprecedented support for British businesses when the government effectively shuttered much of the economy to keep people at home and prevent the spread of the coronavirus. And Linda, coming to you first, I was quite surprised by the Prime Minister's spokesman saying that there was an established order of precedence. This is something that I was not aware of in British politics.
I think I'd heard that before. I don't know where, I don't know when, but I wasn't surprised by it, that the way of order has come out. But I think there's a concern about the new Chancellor having risen so fast through the ranks. People are a bit concerned that he's inexperienced. What I would say is that the Prime Minister himself, as the First Minister in the Scottish Government, is first among equals. Mm-hmm. We have a cabinet style of government. There's collective and joint responsibility. So I would certainly hope that there's a lot of old experienced heads there that can balance the inexperienced heads. And actually a mix of both may well not be a bad thing, but it's quite a daunting task for a comparatively young man. It's a daunting task for anyone. But I would hope that everyone would work together. And, whatever I think of the current UK government, whatever my politics, I do believe that when you're facing a crisis like this, everybody has to pull together, help out and do the best that we can.
John, what's your feeling about this? Clearly, Sunak, as Linda has said, there is not an experienced politician. To be elevated to one of the great offices of state like that, a lot of people said that he was only there because he was a Johnson loyalist and was willing to take instruction from Johnson rather than be more independent the way that Sajid Javid wanted to be. What's your thoughts on the potential for Sunak to kind of ascend to even greater power?
Well, Kenny, I should say I struggle a little bit to hear some of what Linda was saying, but I think I picked up the gist of it. I think the reality is there's no one there that's not a Johnson supporter. That seems to be a prerequisite for being in the cabinet and I wish Mr. Sunak and all the others well in their endeavours, because this is a joint endeavour. You know, the political scientists use the term permanence. Politicians are voted in, we're voted out. The permanence rests often with the officials, and there's some very powerful people in the civil service there. And you would hope that the wise counsel that I heard that Linda referred to may come from that source. However, a lot suggests that the behaviour, even thus far, of this government is that they don't listen to some of the conventions, they don't listen to some of these people. I hope I'm wrong with that. I certainly heard a former professor, I think he's at St Andrews University now, who had been their chief medical advisor, saying that the decisions, and this has affected previous governments too, some of the things that would have addressed the situation now are seen as unpalatable, so we don't want to plan for these pandemics, for the disaster scenarios, and you're thereafter, when it does happen, you're playing catch up. So I hope there are enough wise heads providing advice there, and I hope importantly that evidenced advice is listened to.
Well, on that subject of disaster scenarios, the British government declined to say who has responsibility for the UK's nuclear codes while Prime Minister Boris Johnson is treated in intensive care for COVID-19 complications. When asked by the BBC if Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab had been handed the nuclear codes while Johnson receives treatment, Cabinet Office Minister Michael Gove said, "There are well-developed protocols which are in place. I just really cannot talk about national security issues." The UK is one of the world's 5 official nuclear weapon states and has 4 nuclear submarines armed with Trident II D5 ballistic missiles loaded with nuclear warheads. The United Kingdom has a stockpile of about 215 nuclear warheads, though about 120 are operationally available. Only the British Prime Minister can authorise a nuclear strike. Such an order would be transmitted to one of Britain's nuclear submarines with a special set of codes. And John, this is one of those issues where the Prime Minister does have exclusive responsibility for ordering a nuclear strike. But we're being told that he is still the Prime Minister. What do you think about this situation where potentially nuclear weapons couldn't be launched, or there might be some sort of problem with that chain of command?
Well, the problem, of course, is the presence of nuclear weapons. That's the big problem, and the aggravation to that problem is the link with the United States and the individual who's in charge there. So who has control? I think, sadly, President Trump may have an undue influence on that. It is very worrying. And of course, maybe one of the good things that can come out of this pandemic is the idea that countries have to work collaboratively. We've seen that within the UK. I aspire to Scotland being an independent country. Scotland has worked collaboratively, as have the other nations of the United Kingdom, with the UK government. I would like to see greater cooperation between the United Kingdom and the EU. And if we build on that, then I hope we could build a consensus that there's no need for obscenities and we wouldn't have to be asking questions like this. But it is worrying that we have junior people, in terms of certainly longevity in post, in important roles. But here's hoping that there's no requirement to have any decision about who does what with nuclear weapons. The thing that should be happening with nuclear weapons is that should be dismantled with due haste.
Yeah. Linda, obviously, I don't think any of us here are fans of nuclear weapons at all, but is there a case there, do you think, for having more than one person having to be responsible for them, where maybe it has to be 2 or 3 people in senior positions who have to make the decision rather than just the Prime Minister, or as John was saying, somebody like Donald Trump having unilateral control over the arsenal?
Yeah, it depends. I think I agree with everything John said. I'm finding it a wee bit difficult to hear everything he says. But it depends why that system was in place. If that system's in place to allow one or t'other of 3 or 4 different people, or if it's about, joint agreement to, who can press the button in the absence of others, it wouldn't make any difference how many there were. Mm-hmm. But if it's about having calm heads and rational discussion, and it has to be a unanimous agreement and there would be a veto, it'd be worth looking at. What I would say in this current situation, what the world's facing just now, what the UK is facing just now, call it a natural rather than a a sort of synthetic threat. I would hope that when you look at the effect this is having on so many people across the country, the economy generally, and how that affects people, and what we're going to need to do to work our way through all the effects of this, I would hope that they look seriously at not upgrading and renewing these nuclear weapons. I think that's a discussion that must be had.
Yes, absolutely. That's much. So probably not something we're going to be discussing immediately, but certainly something that Broadcasting Scotland and many others will be hoping to hear in the future. Yeah. Anyway, back in Scotland, more than 2,000 final year nursing and midwifery students have stepped forward to join the NHS Scotland workforce during the coronavirus pandemic. First Minister Nicola Sturgeon has praised the commitment and enthusiasm of those who are taking on frontline roles early, ahead of formally joining the workforce at the end of August. So far, around 12,000 students and returners from health and social care have come forward to offer their skills and expertise during the pandemic. First Minister Nicola Sturgeon said, "We are asking a lot of nursing and midwifery students to step up at this unprecedented time when they have already experienced significant disruption as they come to the end of their courses. Their skills and experience will be vital in the coming months as we work to save as many lives as possible. Our response to the COVID-19 outbreak is going to require a huge effort across all areas of health and social care. It is still possible for others to offer their support, and if they are willing and able, I would encourage them to do so. The commitment and enthusiasm of these volunteers, as with all of our NHS workers, deserves recognition and the gratitude of every one of us in Scotland." And Chief Nursing Officer Fiona McQueen said, "I want to thank each and every student who has volunteered their support so far. The response we have received shows the incredible spirit of our future NHS workforce. Your dedication is truly inspirational." And John, this is good news, isn't it? That we've got people able to join the workforce when effectively their course is over, but they're just waiting for all the formalities to take place.
I think it's great news. I continually, in monitoring news bulletins as well, do hear the praise being heaped on the NHS and the warmth in that praise, and it's entirely appropriate. And I know people consider it an honour to play a part in it at all levels. I'm very proud to say my late mother was a hospital cleaner, and we know the value of how having clean premises is now. So for these young people, and some of them not so young, who are getting an early taste of the front line, I think this will be character building. I think it will be absolutely essential. I'm a former police officer. I recall you can sit in a classroom for so long, you can be accompanied for so long. At some point, you're going to have to do things on your own, and it's not as if they'll be working in splendid isolation. Of course, there'll be appropriate checks and balances and supervision, and we need the workforce supplemented at this time. I think this is tremendous in-job experience for the students, and I wish them all very well. Can I just say one other point at this stage, of course, because there's another category of people who have been encouraged to volunteer, and they've done so in numbers, and that is social work, former social work staff. And they're going to be vital in coordinating aspects of care at home packages and the extra attention that will be required of children when there isn't the access to children beyond monitoring. So using everyone, and of course there's the volunteer scheme as well, using everyone as a national resource, I think it's a great thing, and I'm sure those involved will find it very rewarding.
Yeah. I mean, Linda, this is obviously a really big challenge for people to come into the workforce at this time, but it's notable that these are people volunteering. This is not people being kind of conscripted into it. What do you make of these volunteers coming in?
Well, I think it's fabulous. We've often said that Scotland's greatest resource is Scotland's people, and I think it's been proven by the amount of people that are coming forward, and what a baptism of fire for these student nurses and healthcare workers. But that's happening right across society at the moment. I mean, in hospitals, there's people who are not normally doing that kind of job who are stepping up to the mark. People are just mucking in. Right across our local authorities, the folk being deployed to all different roles. Then you look at the shop workers that are turning up every day, the people that are part of the food chain that makes sure that we're all eating. There's just so many people who are doing their bit for this, and it's the vast majority of people. So whilst there's volunteers volunteering to do all these specific things, there's also people who are volunteering to carry on with their work as normal. Despite how difficult that is and the difficulties they have at home and everything that goes with it. So yeah, vast majority of people are turning out and caring for their fellow citizens.
Yeah, and as I would just like to echo what John said. My gran was a hospital cleaner as well, and we're seeing now just how vital that is.
Of course. Same with the school cleaners. I mean, I know that in South Lanarkshire Council, the folk that were cleaning schools are all being deployed to other duties, waiting to be told whether they're needed in the nursing homes, whether they're needed in different places. So everybody's doing their bit, and it's great. Everybody that can. There are those that would love to be doing their bit and just can't. Whether it's because they're in the shielding programme, whether it's because they're having to socially isolate. But, for those for whom it's safe to do so, the majority of people are doing their bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, what you said about like shop workers and people working in food production, it's all vital. And I hope when this is over, we do kind of have a review of what essential work means and how we compensate a lot of that essential work.
We talk about public service, and when we talk about public service, we tend to think of it in the narrow constraints of the health service, the police, fire, councils. But actually, there's a load of different services and jobs that are there for the public, whether or not we call them public service.
Absolutely. Additional funding of £5.5 million will be provided to community pharmacies to help them cope with increased pressures from coronavirus. Pharmacy workloads almost doubled during March, with increased prescriptions, staff overtime and a higher level of consultations, all resulting in additional costs for the service. The additional funding will be added to the network's March payments. Health Secretary Jean Freeman said, "I want to thank all community pharmacy teams for their incredible hard work throughout this pandemic. They are doing an invaluable job to ensure people continue to receive vital medicines and care through the period of unprecedented challenge for the NHS. Given the exceptional situation we're in, I have taken the unusual step of asking community pharmacies to remain open on Good Friday and Easter Monday, where it is possible to do so. This will help to alleviate some pressure from out-of-hours services. Working with the Community Pharmacy Scotland, we have agreed this initial package of additional funding for community pharmacies to help them meet some of the costs of responding to COVID-19 and to allow them to continue to meet the increased demand on their crucial services." And again, John, this is very much similar to what we were just talking about with people volunteering in hospital. Pharmacists as well have been putting in a lot of effort to keep the system working.
They play a key role, Kenny. They always have played a key role, and they'll continue to play a key role. And to many, it might only become evident now, but we all know the value of the over-the-counter consultation there is with pharmacists, the pressure that can take off frontline GP services, and really the support people have from having them in the community. I'm grateful that the Cabinet Secretary for Health, I'm sure she would have recognised that anyway, that there's a tangible benefit coming for this additional work, because it's absolutely vital. And I was seeing a news bulletin where there was volunteers assisting with the delivery of prescriptions, because of course people are housebound, and with the restrictions that are there, everyone needs to be pulling their weight, and community pharmacists and the staff
absolutely
are doing an excellent job. Yes.
Yeah, and Linda, this £5.5 million. There's a lot of money had to be spent in a lot of different sectors by both the UK government and the Scottish government. What do you think of how this kind of spending has been managed?
I can only really. I've been so busy with constituency stuff because there's so many worried people out there that I sometimes feel I'm behind the loop in the news. I just learned about the community pharmacy funding a wee while before I came on, so I don't quite know how it's going to be dispersed yet. But what I do know is that I think it's pretty vital. I mean, here in East Kilbride, we've had some real issues with some pharmacies, not all, some pharmacies being so overcrowded, queues for 2 and 3 hours sometimes for prescriptions. And, that's where a lot of volunteers are coming in as well. There's people volunteering to stand in the queues for folk that are socially isolating, or self-isolating, sorry. And it's been really difficult. People worried about not getting their prescriptions. So what I'm hoping is that some of this funding will be able to be used to alleviate these pressures in specific places. And I'm hoping that Community Pharmacists Scotland, who are an excellent organisation and know their membership and know where the hotspots are, will be able to use some of that to give some relief to that strain that's going on in particular pharmacies. And it's not just in East Kilbride, I'm sure it's happening in other places too. But a lot of worried people thinking, I'm not going to get my prescription, how am I going to collect it, what am I going to do? A lot of hours being spent waiting for vital medicines for people. So I hope that it will go towards some of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And more health news. Health Secretary Jean Freeman thanked the public and health and social care staff as weekly A&E statistics showed continued record low attendances. Ms Freeman said the number of attendances to A&E this week was the lowest on record since weekly reporting began, with 92.2% of people being seen within 4 hours. I would like to thank members of the public for continuing to listen to advice and only going to A&E if illnesses are immediate or life-threatening. This is helping to free up vital resources to allow NHS staff to be redeployed to support the response to the coronavirus pandemic. I would also like to again pay tribute to Scotland's health and social care staff for their continued hard work and dedication. You're providing an exceptional level of care during these extraordinary times, and each and every one of you has my very grateful thanks. We are doing all we can to support you, working with health boards and partnerships to ensure robust plans are in place to strengthen capacity and minimise the impact of COVID-19 across the health system. Now, Linda, this is the second week in a row there have been record high throughput at A&E, and again it's people making the decision, according to Jean Freeman, to not go to A&E unless things are really urgent, which is really how we should all be treating the system in the first place, isn't it?
Well, up to a point. I don't read too much into these figures. I mean, I think it's good that this is happening during this crisis because, it's really important that people don't turn up and congregate in hospitals. So I think that's good. But I'm a bit leery of reading too much into these things because it is a very exceptional time. And I also am a wee bit worried about maybe people that really aren't well, who can't get a doctor's appointment, because I know that's, people are not getting GP appointments like under normal circumstances you would, aren't going to A&E for things. So I would be a wee bit wary about welcoming these figures just too much too soon. Yeah,
obviously. And John, obviously up in the Highlands, there are extra difficulties with managing healthcare because so many people live so far from a hospital. How are you hearing that the pressure has been on hospitals up in your part of the world?
Well, perhaps gratifyingly, I've had no specific issues raised with me about that. I've had a myriad of issues that have been raised, but not that. And you're right to say there are particular challenges regarding the delivery of care in remote and rural areas. And, certainly NHS Highland and the other health boards are quite creative in how they're going about things. If I can maybe just go back to A&E and the point that Linda rightly raised about access to GP services. And this is this jigsaw that must come together. So the pressure on pharmacists to take some of the pressure off of GPs, and GPs in turn being in a position to provide appointments within a time frame that stops people going to A&E. There are some categories of people, and I think particularly one category I like to give support, and that's the gypsy traveller community, who can have difficulties registering with a doctor. Likewise, people with addiction issues, you may think it's simple to register with a doctor. And, I think it's important that people, if they believe they require medical assistance, seek it. And if they can't do it by the more conventional ways that you and I might do it, by phoning 101 or getting an appointment with a GP, and then there are some people for whom the only alternative is pitch up at A&E with all the challenges that can bring. But People's expectations of the NHS service and National Health Service are extremely high, and I think that that's a compliment, but it's also a challenge. And you know, there are people who have relocated to the Highlands on occasions who've been a bit taken aback that we don't necessarily have the full range of facilities that there are elsewhere. You'll be aware that there's a particular pressure in Shetland, an area I represent, with military aircraft on standby for evacuating because there isn't any dedicated intensive care unit there. So people know that, but of course, it's important that people have access to the same level of treatment that might be delivered in different ways. And heaven forbid there's too many people have to go in the back of a military aircraft from Shetland.
Absolutely. And we would just remind people at home, if you think you have the coronavirus infection and you're in a bad way, then don't go to A&E. Phone the NHS and they will deal with you in a separate stream. The last thing we need is you wandering into an A&E waiting room and coughing all over people. So you know there are ways of managing these things. The NHS is, as both John and Linda have said, they're doing everything they can to provide the best possible service. So you can go to the NHS Inform website, or you can call, as John said, the 111 number, and they can advise you where you should be. But anyway, moving on. Commenting on trade union concerns that supplementary guidance issued by the Chief Nursing Officer puts care staff at unnecessary risk, Scottish Greens parliamentary co-leader Alison Johnson MSP said, "Everyone involved in the delivery of social care needs to have confidence in the provision of personal protective equipment and the guidance on how and when it should be used. It's clear that isn't currently the case. Whether working in a care home or visiting a vulnerable person at home, care workers must be provided with appropriate equipment and adequate guidance to keep both themselves and the person they're caring for safe. The Scottish Government must urgently address the significant concerns highlighted by the care workers' trade unions." And John, your colleague there, Alison Johnson, raising concerns about care workers, particularly, I think, workers who are visiting people in their homes. These are obviously already vulnerable people, and then you're maybe seeing a dozen people in a day. What's your thoughts on what Alison had to say there about the provision of protective equipment for workers in that field?
I can say, Kenny, none of what we discuss are party political issues, and indeed the members from across the chamber, from all the parties, have been raising these issues, and the Cabinet Secretary for Health has done their very best to address them. I'm aware of the particular issue with that you highlight. Indeed, Unison have rightly said that some of the advice, which differs from the UK advice issued last week, the supplementary guidance, so-called, has not been helpful. Basically, it says do as you would ordinarily be doing. Well, that isn't the position that the staff feel comfortable with. Can I say something though? There's a range of people provide care in our communities, and the vast majority of care home, it's the independent sector provide. These are private employers. An employer has an obligation to their staff. They have an obligation to assess the risks and put in measures to address the risks, and that's what personal protective equipment is, of course. Everything doesn't land at the door of government. I think what we have here is a problem, not necessarily of the availability, but of the distribution lines. I know that no one is given answers in a cursory way. Everyone's very keen to make sure that everyone has access to the appropriate equipment. And I'm sure at the end of all this, there'll be a debate about what should be in place ordinarily anyway, just in the event of something like this happening. But Unison's concerns, which were shared with me today, I agree with. It's not right to say that in the middle of this pandemic, put on an apron, put on gloves, do what you ordinarily do. I think, and I'm sure indeed that the Scottish Government will be reviewing that guidance, which the supplementary guidance, which alters that, which I think went out on Friday. But everyone has common purpose here in wanting all our staff to be in the best of health in order that they can deliver the best of care to many vulnerable people. And we have a growing and ageing population. That's something that we should be celebrating. And it's important that they get all the best of care that they can from healthy people.
Mm-hmm. And Linda, how do you think, as John said, as it's not just government, there are companies like Cordia involved in this in the care sector. What's your take on how social care workers have been affected in that way?
I can only really talk about my own area, and what happened very, very quickly in Lanarkshire was the NHS Lanarkshire and the councils, South Lanarkshire Council from my point of view, but I presume North Lanarkshire Council too, issued joint statements saying that they were working together on all these things. And I think that's crucial, that joined up approach. And guidance. It's getting the equipment, yes, and I know there's been concerns, and I think there have been distribution problems. I heard today in Lanarkshire, though, that these things were now getting delivered. And I have had private care providers on to me too. What's crucial is that coordination. And if you have the health board and the council working together as the responsibility for making sure that those in their area are properly looked after and crucially get very, very clear guidance. And yes, there is an onus on the private care people, but they are largely appointed by local authorities who have the monitoring role over them as well. So that is where that crucial coordination comes in. Health board, council, make sure that these employees and indeed the client group that are being visited are being properly cared for, looked after, and have the correct information. It's not easy, but they are capable of doing it. All these big organisations like the health boards and the councils, they all have resilience plans that kick in when something awful like this happens. This has been a huge one, but certainly they should have had plans in place to be dealing with all these things and how they're going to oversee it and monitor it. And I think, yes, there's a responsibility in central government, there's a responsibility in local government, and a responsibility in all the employers, and indeed in the trade union. I mean, the trade union is quite right to be always raising the concerns of their members, and that's as it should be.
Yeah. Anyway, lawyers have been inundated with inquiries from divorced parents arguing about where their children should stay during the lockdown, with some trying to get their former partners sent to jail for breaking existing custody arrangements. Some parents have been using the coronavirus outbreak as an excuse to stop their ex from seeing their children, withholding access on spurious grounds, including, "My ex won't be able to teach my child their times tables." One woman asked her lawyer to apply to a judge to send her ex to prison after he failed to pick up their child for a regular visit, despite him having proof he wouldn't have been able to get there for any amount of money. Another wanted her husband to go to jail after he took the children to a different address from that stipulated on their court order in order to shield vulnerable relatives at the usual home. Many parents report their exes refusing to return children from visits, making their children so scared of catching the virus that they don't want to see the other parent, and saying that the child could not leave because the household was self-isolating with symptoms, only to post pictures on social media suggesting otherwise. Others are saying that because their ex is one of the UK's 7 million key workers, they are at high risk of contracting the virus, and therefore they don't want their children with them. When the UK lockdown came into force on Monday 23rd of March, the government appeared to have forgotten about children who split their time between separated parents. A footnote was inserted into the guidance the following morning, clarifying that where parents do not live in the same household, children under 18 can be moved between their parents' homes. And you would have thought, of all people, Linda, Boris Johnson might have known about parents who don't live with their children and the issues that might affect them.
Thank you, Kenny.
How has this affected anyone in your experience?
Right. Well, also the Scottish Government were fairly quick coming out with their guidance, because one of the very first questions I got asked about lockdown, like in the early hours of the morning, from a parent was this very question. I was able to find the guidance on the Scottish Government stuff straight away, which is, as you outlined. I know there's difficulties. Of course, there's difficulties, but I haven't had any of the issues you've just described. There's been a few wee bits here and there, but nothing as extreme as that. Parents have to have the interests of the child at heart. That's what the government's doing, having the child's interest at heart in all of these guidelines that are laid down. And the onus is on the parents, both parents, if they're two parents, to have the interests of the child at heart. And to be quite honest, I get really fed up with some of this stuff. because I think you're going to get a grip, going to just look after the interests of your child. And I don't think, except in extreme cases, where there are bad people, of course there are, who'll try and take advantage of this for their own ends and perhaps not think through the child. But really, talk it over, come to the best interest of the child and decide what's best. It might be hard for one parent, but if it's the best for the child, that's what you should do.
Yeah. I should clarify, by the way, when I referred to the government advice, it was the UK government advice, not the Scottish government advice there. But John, this kind of goes back to what you were saying earlier about access to social workers, where there are issues throughout society where when people are stuck in the house and told not to go outside, a lot of issues become exacerbated. What do you make of this story, these problems that some families seem to be experiencing?
Well, Kenny, sorry, once again, I picked up very little of what Linda said, but I did pick up one phrase, and that was the interests of the child, and I think Linda said that should be at the forefront of people's thoughts. These are very testing times for people, and particularly people who might be in a relatively confined space. I think of young families maybe in high-rise flats and overcrowded premises. It's very important the support is there. I today retweeted something from Children First about parent line. I think that a lot of the children, people can feel exacerbated. I absolutely understand that. There's a lot of support there. In fact, there's endless support. If it's about people having access to it. I hope we wouldn't get to the stage where any returning social workers were spending time on issues like this. I think common sense must prevail. I think that people can understand that children are better perhaps having two loving parents living apart than two parents rowing together. But the common sense must prevail, and of course regard had to the determinations of court in relation to these matters. There's legislation we're doing just now on the Justice Committee about the Children's Act that is looking about, of course, a lot of things have been compounded, of course, because we're a very multicultural society and with children who are separated, not just within a locality, but by countries. And of course, coming out of Brexit is going to make adherence to some of these decisions by court very, very challenging. Family law is a complex area, but let's hope that it's not an important issue and people know where to find support. I also retweeted today something from Dad's Rock, the group that provides a lot of support for fathers on their own with children. So there is support there, and I hope people will.
Yeah. Moving on now, in Australia's highest court acquitted former Vatican treasurer Cardinal George Pell today of sexually assaulting two teenage choir boys in the 1990s, freeing the 78-year-old after 404 days in jail. The Vatican welcomed the decision and praised Pell for having waited for the truth to be ascertained. In a statement, it said it always had confidence in Australian justice, that Pell had always maintained his innocence, and that the Holy See reaffirmed its commitment to preventing and pursuing all cases of abuse against minors. The High Court, ruling from Brisbane, ordered Pell's convictions to be quashed and verdicts of acquittal to be entered in their place, ending the most high-profile case of alleged historical sex abuse to hit the Catholic Church in Australia. The 7 judges of the High Court agreed unanimously that the jury in the Cardinal's trial ought to have entertained a doubt about his guilt. Pell, who has maintained his innocence throughout the lengthy court process, cannot be retried on the charges. I hold no ill will towards my accuser. I do not want my acquittal to add to the hurt and bitterness so many feel. There is certainly hurt and bitterness enough, Pell said in a statement shortly before he was driven away from the maximum security Barwon prison near Melbourne. And Linda, this has been a case that's been going on for quite a while. As we saw, 404 days in jail on what appeared, according to the appeal court, to have been a fairly shaky conviction. What do you make of this announcement?
Well, I haven't read into it, Kenny. I really don't know an awful lot about it. I think it's interesting because if you had asked me this when you were convicted, I would have been saying, we have to respect the judgment of the court. And now, you're asking about it on appeal when the conviction's squashed or quashed. There's no S, is it? It's just quashed.
It's just quashed, yeah.
And I have to say, I have to respect the decision of the court. I don't know enough about any of it to have a personal opinion on it, I have to say. What I would say is that I hope it doesn't take the foot off the pedal on issues of child abuse and historic child abuse, whether it be in the Catholic Church, any other church, or indeed any institution that we have seen has been guilty of perhaps not pursuing strongly enough allegations like this. So I would hope it doesn't damage that cause. Yeah.
I believe Cardinal Pell, or possibly somebody from the Australian Church, did say that this wouldn't and it shouldn't mean that people shouldn't come forward with other allegations if they had those allegations to make. But moving on again, though, the 2022 World Cup in Qatar has become the focus of fresh FIFA corruption allegations after the release of a new US Department of Justice indictment which says bribes were paid to the football officials to secure their votes for the hosting rights. Suspicion and rumours have long surrounded both the 2010 vote by FIFA's executive to hand the 2018 World Cup to Russia and the 2022 tournament to Qatar. But on Monday, for the first time, prosecutors set direct, formal allegations down in print. According to the prosecutors, representatives working for Russia and Qatar bribed FIFA Executive Committee officials to swing votes in the crucial hosting decisions on world football's governing body. Qatar World Cup organisers have so far not commented. Qatar and Russia's World Cup bidding teams have always denied paying bribes. FIFA said in a statement it supported all investigations into alleged acts of criminal wrongdoing and noted it had been accorded victim status in the US criminal proceedings. The FIFA Ethics Committee has already imposed sanctions, including life bans on football officials mentioned in this process, said a FIFA spokesman. So far as FIFA is concerned, should any acts of criminal wrongdoing by football officials be established, the individuals in question should be subject to penal sanctions. As the respective criminal cases are ongoing, we are not in a position to comment further for the time being. And John, this is a case that's rumbled on, as it said, since 2010. We've been hearing different accusations, different allegations dripping out, and some, as we said there, FIFA taking action against several people. What do you think of these criminal charges now being brought?
Well, Kenny, I'm a big fan of the beautiful game, and I would like to think that at some future dates I'll get back to the World Cup to see Scotland play. Sadly, football's blighted, and it's been blighted by corruption allegations and corruption, the fact that there has been corruption. I don't think anyone who understands climate, who understands football, would for 1 second understand why the tournament would have gone to Qatar in the first place. I think there's a major problem with our beautiful game. I think business and money is important, not the joy that people take from participating in sport. And it's the worst aspects of capitalism mixed in with the blazerace, as they're sometimes referred to, people who seem to get themselves in positions of power. They are in positions of power. They wield great influence. Issues probably shouldn't go into about whether leaks should be finished or not. I understand that key to all of the decision-making that is finance, not public health, not sportsmanship, but finance and television deals. So football has become intrinsically linked with huge sums of money. And I hope, if there's any corrupt practices anywhere, I want people taken to justice. They have the presumption of innocence obviously must apply, but there's no doubt that anyone who has a passing understanding of football is very uncomfortable, not just by FIFA, but UEFA often too. And we need to sort it out. And quite frankly, I don't see how we can do it. It's big business writ large.
Yeah. Moving on now to some good news about coronavirus potentially. Doctors have found tentative evidence that seriously ill coronavirus patients can benefit from infusions of blood plasma collected from people who have recovered from the disease. 2 teams of medics working at separate hospitals in China gave antibody-rich plasma to 15 severely ill patients and recorded striking improvements in many of them. In one pilot study, doctors in Wuhan gave convalescent plasma to 10 severely ill patients and found that virus levels in their bodies dropped rapidly. Within 3 days, the doctors saw improvements in the patient's symptoms, ranging from shortness of breath and chest pains to fever and coughing. Xiaoming Yang from the National Engineering Technology Research Center for Combined Vaccines in Wuhan described the treatment as a promising rescue option for severely ill patients, but cautioned that a larger randomized trial was needed to confirm the findings. Details of the pilot study are reported in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. The findings raise hope that donated blood from recently recovered patients could be used to boost the immune systems of more vulnerable people and help them fight the infection. But with only a small number of patients so far treated with plasma and the infusions given outside of formal trials, it's impossible to know how much benefit the treatment really brings. Professor David Tappan, a senior research fellow at the University of Glasgow, has applied to the UK's National Institute for Health Research to run 2 clinical trials with convalescent plasma. They will look for evidence that plasma can protect frontline workers from infection, prevent patients from deteriorating and needing ventilation in intensive care units, and improve the conditions of those who are already severely ill. And Linda, as we said, this is very small numbers. It's only 15 people, and they were apparently being treated with other antiviral agents. But if this is something that can work, then it sounds like great news, doesn't it?
Well, let's hope that the Glasgow tests will show that, yes, that they have confidence in it. That would be absolutely super. I mean, we've got some great research scientists in Scotland, so in Glasgow University, of course. So, yeah, I'm really pleased to hear that they're looking at it, and I hope we'll be able to hear their point of view of it fairly soon.
Yeah, and John, what do you make of this announcement?
I think the exciting thing for me is the willingness of China to share this, and I think, like I said earlier in relation to the nuclear issue, that it's very important there's international cooperation on this. You know, when people talk about, and I heard news coverage today about India selling drugs to the United States, we need international collaboration on this. We need, and I understand that will be taking place. You know, among academia and research people, they've traditionally worked very collaboratively, and I think that's important. It's only when finance, it's only sometimes when big pharma and advertising get involved that suddenly the ethics of it seem to twist a little bit. So I'm delighted, and I hope that the authorities in China will share the maximum of information, because clearly, and I think yesterday they say they recorded no instances of the virus for the first time. There's an awful lot to be learned, as there is from Italy and from Spain, 2 countries in Europe who have been badly afflicted by this, and also Germany, where a different approach has been taken. But you know, any hope of finding a solution is one that has to benefit mankind, has to benefit the worldwide, and not, stick at national boundaries.
Yeah, it's been very impressive to me, having seen several countries working together to get a big enough cohort together for some of these trials. As you say, I think international cooperation is going to have to be the way forward. And finally tonight, a small congregation of worshippers will hold a short service on Good Friday at the Notre-Dame Cathedral in Paris, a year after it was devastated by fire. But attendance will be limited because of a lockdown during the coronavirus outbreak. 7 people will attend the televised service on Friday when Christians commemorate the death of Jesus Christ. Only a few priests will attend the masses that we will celebrate during the Holy Week, and people will be able to follow services on radio or television, Paris Archbishop Michel Aupetit told a video news conference. The service will include a wreath rescued after the fire at Notre-Dame. There will be no Easter Saturday processions this year because of the lockdown, which limits the size of public gatherings. On Easter Sunday, when Christians celebrate the resurrection, Aupetit will hold a mass in Saint-Germain-l'Auxerrois church near Le Louvre Museum in the heart of Paris, with about 20 people attending. Last year, hundreds of Parisians gathered for Easter Sunday Mass at Saint Eustache Church in central Paris and prayed for the swift restoration of Notre Dame after the fire that ripped through it days earlier on April 15th. The fire destroyed the medieval cathedral's roof, toppled the spire, and almost brought down the main bell towers and outer walls before firefighters brought it under control. President Emmanuel Macron has set a target of 5 years for restoring Notre-Dame, one of Paris's most famous buildings. And Linda, I'm sure for people who are fans of Paris, this will be great news to hear that the church is able to be used at all, even if it is only by 7 people.
It seems like a lot longer than a year ago. A lot has happened in that year. Mm-hmm. I'm sure it will mean a great deal to a great deal of people. And, you know, it makes a lot of people feel happy, feel spiritual, and feel that it brings their Christianity close to them at a very special time for Christians. Well, that's wonderful.
Yeah. John, I'm assuming you would feel much the same.
Well, I've been described as a man of no faith, but what I have to tell you, I do understand the great comfort people take from their involvement with faith groups, and particularly at pivotal times, Easter being the significant one for Christian religions. So I think that will bring comfort to people, and I welcome that. I think people have always been innovative, whether it's tape recording as it was of church services and delivering them to older people. I know latterly my mother received service coverage like that. I think not everyone has access to the internet, and people will want to be creative about how to share their experiences. But it's a magnificent building, absolutely magnificent building. It's an icon of the Parisian skyline, and I think for that reason it's symbolic in many ways, not just for faith. So, I welcome anything that gives people comfort.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for the French people, just to see Notre-Dame back in service, even if it's still clearly got a lot of reconstruction to go, will be very, very welcome news. But that is all we've got time for tonight. So I'd like to thank you at home for joining us. It's what we do these programs for. We wouldn't be worth it if we didn't have an audience. If you're able to support Broadcasting Scotland, then we would be very grateful for that support. If you're able to go to broadcastingscotland.scot/register, sign up as a supporter, your £5 a month can make a huge difference to what we do here at Broadcasting Scotland. But following our successful 700 Live Ceilidh on Saturday to mark the 700th anniversary of the declaration of Arbroath, we've decided to invest in increasing remote production capacity so that we can do more remote live events once we're allowed out of the studio by increasing our fibre connection to 1 gigabite and installing a new production computer. This will involve an investment of about £3,000, which will transform the way we connect to remote guests and increase the number of guests that we can connect to simultaneously. So if you're able to donate a wee bit more towards that, again, we know that times are tough just now. We know that a lot of people are on reduced incomes. So obviously, if you can't afford it, don't feel you have to. But if you're able to, then if you can contribute something, then that would be very welcome. And it will make a big difference to what we're able to do here at Broadcasting Scotland. If you're not able to support us financially, though, again, please don't feel bad. We know that, as I said, times are tough. But you can help us by following us on Twitter at Broadcast Scot. You can also find us on Facebook, and you can share the shows around with people. That's a big thing, that the marketing of this channel comes almost entirely from our audience. You have to let people know what Broadcasting Scotland is, why you enjoy the shows, and why you think independent broadcasting in Scotland is important. That's how we get the word out. That's how we grow our audience. And as we grow the audience, it becomes that much easier to make everything happen. So anything you can do to help is very, very welcome. So thank you, obviously, to John and to Linda for joining us. It's always a pleasure to talk to both of you. And again, thank you for joining us tonight. I'll be back tomorrow at 7. And until then, have a great night.